Welcome to NDTAC's N&D InFocus. I'm Nicholas Reed.
And I'm Alexandra Brawley.
The landmark Correctional Education Guidance Package was jointly released by the U.S. Departments of Education and Justice in December 2014. The package was developed with the belief that all youth should have access to high-quality education and supports, and with the purpose of ensuring that some of the nation's most vulnerable youth, those in juvenile secure care settings, have, as President Barack Obama stated, a real chance at a second chance, the opportunity to demonstrate growth and maturity, and ultimately to fulfill their potential as human beings. Since the release of the package, momentum has been building at the national, state, and local levels to better address the educational and related needs of these young people. Today, NDTAC is concluding our series of N&D InFocus programs on the Correctional Education Guidance Package. In the program, we're taking a look back at the impetus of the guidance package, examining its impact so far, and discussing what the federal government, national organizations, and state and local agencies and programs can do next to keep high-quality correctional education moving forward. To start the program, we're honored to be joined by the Administrator of the Department of Justice's Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, or OJJDP, Robert Listenby, and by the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, Seth Galanter. Gentlemen, welcome to the program, and thank you both for being with us today. We want to start today by taking a look back at what led to the creation of the guidance package. Administrator Listenby, if we could start with you and have you tell us, from the Department of Justice's and OJJDP's perspectives, why was developing and releasing this guidance so important? What were the departments hoping to accomplish with this?
Certainly. Our research tells us that there are about 54,000 youth in confinement in juvenile justice institutions on any given day. Now, that's a dramatic decrease from the year 2000, when there were about 109,000 youth. We know that if we can equip these youth with high-quality education, that will effectively support their transition back to their communities. And once they get back to their communities, they still have a challenge of reconnecting with prior educational institutions and also seeking and finding employment. But this is a major step in that direction. We have one recent RAND study, which was funded by the Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance, that found that for every $1 invested in adult correctional education programs, it reduced future incarceration costs by $5 in the first 3 years after an inmate's release. While the study focused on adults, we think that there are perhaps similar types of conclusions that can be drawn with targeted investments in correctional education for youth. We recognize that there's a need for additional research in order to confirm this. We think we're on the right track. And so when this program began, Attorney General Eric Holder and Secretary Arne Duncan had a vision that we should focus in this area with the hopes that we were going to equip youth with the tools for better outcomes in their futures.
And Deputy Assistant Secretary Galanter, what about from the perspective of the Department of Education?
Sure. Education is one of the most powerful tools the government has to shape the lives of young people and ensure a path to the middle class. For high-risk kids, particularly kids who have had intersection with the justice system, they need special, focused, high-quality education. And what this guidance package was intended to do was focus on two issues. One, aspirational, and focus on what a high-quality education in a confinement setting or in a juvenile justice setting could look like. And it laid out some principles. But it also served as a reminder of some existing obligations under the civil rights laws, under the special education laws that the federal government offers, where kids with disabilities, English learners, girls were protected from discrimination and entitled to the same high-quality education that we hope every kid in the United States is getting. And what we wanted to do here is build on existing momentum that we saw in the states, that we saw from our friends at the Department of Justice, to put together a vision that people could, if they chose, aspire to in their own correctional education facilities, particularly as Bob said, the number of people in a facility on any given day is shrinking, but the needs of the kids who are in those facilities remains critically important if we're going to transition them back to school, to graduation, and then to college and careers.
Now, obviously, it hasn't been that long since the release of the guidance, but it has gained a lot of attention and has really mobilized efforts around the country in many respects. What do you think has been the guidance package's initial impact to this point? What are you hearing from the field?
Well, we've heard that one of the most useful pieces of information contained in the guidance package is clarification on access to Pell Grants for students in juvenile justice facilities. And some states are well underway in their efforts to improve the delivery of educational services, but also to provide access to post-secondary education for youth who've completed their high school diplomas or GEDs. We've also heard that this guidance package has facilitated a discussion between the educational community and the juvenile justice leaders who are directing the facilities. There's a need for this discussion because a lot of times the people who are running the facilities are not familiar with all the laws and rules governing what's happening with children who have special education needs and issues, or children who have disabilities, or English as second learners. And so we need to make sure that the juvenile justice experts who are running the facilities come in contact with these experts and that they learn what the latest techniques and practices and procedures are, and they adopt them and implement them in their facilities. They're required by law to do that, but they need some assistance often to learn more about how they do that, and with assistance from the Department of Justice and assistance from the Department of Education, they can be well along their way towards doing that.
And to add to what Bob was saying, we agree this has been a catalyst for conversation. And what it's done is brought people together who may not, within their state systems, have been speaking to one another about their shared obligations and their shared responsibilities to make sure that the youth who are in these institutions are receiving the education they need, both to, as a matter of federal law, but also so that they can thrive when they leave the institution, which is the ultimate goal, obviously. I would also just add that a lot of these conversations, I think, at least in some places, start with a shared belief that education is critically important for these youth. But as Bob said, it's a question of how to do it. You know, how are we going to integrate a high quality education into a juvenile setting? How are we going to recruit high quality teachers? How are we going to transition kids back when they're done in the institution back to their local schools? Those are in some ways not sexy issues, but they're critical if we're going to see the achievement of the students while they're in these institutions improve, so that they can go on to college and to careers.
Well, I would imagine that both of your agencies have taken on tasks related to promoting and helping the field understand and then follow what's in the guidance package. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the specific things the departments have been working on, maybe starting with a look at the Department of Education?
I think one of the real unique things about both the rollout of the Correctional Education Package and the follow-through that the agencies have done is how collaborative it's been. We have been trying to model the behavior that we're hoping to see at the state and local level, where the juvenile justice components and the education components, including but not limited to special education, are all coming together to try and look at how this works as a system, because for an individual in the system, they don't really see, it seems seamless to them how they're being treated, and so we need to work seamlessly together. So a lot of the follow-up that we've done has been joint work between OJJDP and the Department of Education. A lot of it has been looking at some of the states with the largest populations of confined kids and working with them just to make sure that they understand the purposes of the guidance, try and address some of their questions and concerns, and see how it could be a catalyst for further conversations within the context of the needs and capacity of that state.
Let me add a couple of very specific examples. First of all, as Seth said, we want the partnership, the collaboration, the cooperation that's going on between the Department of Justice and the Department of Education to be the model for our colleagues who are out in the field and for the states in terms of how they interact between the state juvenile justice folks and the Department of Education folks in each state. This has not always been the case. And we recognize that, and we hope that by modeling that behavior at the national level and having these cooperative ventures, both in terms of how we roll the package out, and also having other kinds of activities that we can help encourage that. So each state is finding its own way to look at this issue and figure out how to benefit its youth to get better overall outcomes for their kids, not just reduce recidivism, but also to give kids, as Seth said earlier, ladders of opportunity into the middle class so that they can better their lives, get married, have kids, have a house, have the picket fence, and everything else that goes along with that.
And Administrator Listenby, I know OJJDP, like NDTAC, has highlighted some of the work in the field in these areas, like in Ohio with their apprenticeship programs, and Oregon's increased access to post-secondary education for youth in secure care. Now, of course, the release of the guidance package has not been without its share of questions and concerns from the field, and we know jurisdictions are facing challenges in understanding and implementing what's outlined in the package. Administrator Listenby, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges the field faces with this, and what additional supports might be needed?
Okay. Well, we recognize that we're still in the early stages of the implementation of the guidance package. And so we know that states need to focus on improving teacher quality, credentialing, credentialization, pay increases to get the best people to the students who are in these juvenile justice facilities, and evaluation of progress of teachers in bringing about the reforms that are needed. We recognize that they need to rethink their discipline practices and lockdown procedures in juvenile justice facilities that limit access to education. We think they need to strengthen the contents of their individual education plans or IEPs to discourage the redesign of IEPs on student entry to match the institution's available resources. We want them instead to address the real needs rather than sort of changing them to address the resources that are available. We want to ensure access to legal counsel and help address racial and ethnic disparities of youth of color to reduce entry into the system. We recognize on the juvenile justice side that in many of these institutions, as we reduce the numbers overall, many of these institutions have experienced higher disproportionality than they had in the past, and we want to try and figure out how to address that while making sure the kids get the best possible education. We recognize that for girls, there are unique needs and unique circumstances, and we need to address those unique needs. And so we want to make sure that as we go forward and looking at the packages and addressing these complex issues, that we stay focused on the range of kinds of concerns that girls have and the kinds of concerns that are unique to boys and the kinds of concerns that are unique, for example, to American Indian and Alaska Native children that we've learned from our many studies and in-depth research on the part of the Department of Justice.
And Deputy Assistant Secretary Galanter, your thoughts on this?
I think, first, I recognize as someone who's read the guidance, it's written by lawyers. And so it's not the most English-friendly, plain-meaning document. And I think one of the things that our follow-up TA and the work that NDTAC has been doing is to help translate lawyer into English. And I think that's a very valuable component that we need to work on here at the department as well. I think other kind of impediments to the potential reach of this guidance are, first, making sure that we're targeting the right audiences. As Bob and I have both been saying, that's not just juvenile justice administrators, it's not just education leaders, it has to be everyone. It has to include, the judiciary, it has to include public health officials. It really needs to be wide-ranging audience in order for the compliance to be effective. I would say another thing that's critical is data. My office collects data from school districts about a whole bunch of things to try and measure disproportionality, to measure disparities based on race, based on color, based on sex and disability and English learner status. And the kinds of data that we collect are the kinds of data institutions need to have at their fingertips in real time so that they can see what's going on, to see where disproportionalities are rising and try and figure out what the causes are. We don't have very good data right now about how many English learners are there in our facilities. We have anecdotal evidence suggesting it's a growing percentage of the population, but we don't know. Again, students with disabilities, the last real studies to try and measure how many kids with disabilities are in our correctional facilities are like 20 years old or so. I mean, so we don't have the kind of data we need to be able to measure success and to measure change. And then I think, as both Bob and I have talked about, the way the systems are right now, they are sometimes siloed in some states, and we need to bring people together. Just as Bob and my office work together and our departments are working closer than ever, we need states and localities to bridge those institutional barriers and combine streams of money, combine programs, combine goals when necessary to get people working together towards this common population. From the individual's perspective, it is seamless. They don't know that one pot of money is funding a teacher and the other pot is funding the guard. From their perspective, everyone's working for the institution, and we need to make sure that everyone in the institution's working towards a shared set of goals. All these things are incredibly critical on which to build the educational opportunities for all these people in institutions.
Now, you've both already started to allude to some of this and mention some of this, but with this final program in our series, we really want to be able to look forward as to what might be next for correctional education. In light of the guidance package, building on the momentum from the last few years, and I'm wondering what each of you thinks about this. What is next? What should the field be focused on, and what will your agencies be doing to keep pushing this issue forward?
I'd just like to say we encourage all folks who are engaged in this process, if they have some ideas about how we can do this job better and how we can be more helpful to them, to let us know. There are a variety of mechanisms available to communicate with me and communicate with members of my staff to really let us know what the challenges are that people are experiencing and make some recommendations about how we can do this job better. So we're open to suggestions for one. We believe that the states need to take a close look at the core principles contained in the correctional education packages and begin the process of conducting comprehensive assessments of the quality of education in their juvenile correctional facilities. We want folks to know that the Department of Justice, through the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, has an ongoing partnership with the Department of Education to provide funding for programming to support activities that prepare youth for reintegration in their community upon release. Much of this is through our Second Chance Act funding. We have a specific solicitation that just came out this week, the Juvenile Justice Reentry Education Program, opening doors to college and careers through career and technical education, is jointly funded by Ed and Justice. If we've invested at this point over $2 million in this initiative along with Ed, and if someone wants to find out additional information about this solicitation, they can find that information at www.grants.gov. That's www.grants.gov.
Feedback from the states and from stakeholders is critically important. The collaboration that Ed and DOJ have done at kind of a horizontal level, we need that kind of vertical collaboration as well. We need feedback groups to tell us what we're doing that's helping and what we could be doing better. So feedback is critical so we know that we're building properly on the momentum of the states that started this whole movement. We also think that maybe the next step for a lot of people is kind of a mirror exercise. You can look at this guidance, you can look at the requirements of the law, you can look at the aspirations of the law, and then hold a mirror up to your system and say, how are we doing? Do we even know how we're doing? Is there a data systems issue or a lack of internal feedback? Or if we have our data, what does it show about how are kids measuring up when they leave the institution? How are they doing 3 months later? Are they back in school? Are they being disciplined? Are they succeeding? How many of them are graduating? How many of them are going on to college? These are questions that we hope states will ask themselves based on the guidance. And to the extent their answers aren't to their liking, or that then they take action to move forward. And we can help do that with a lot of technical assistance. As Bob says, we have grant programs targeted on this issue, as well as other experimental and demonstration projects that will allow us to help states identify the best ways to succeed But the first step is always kind of a measure of self-awareness about what's working and what's not right now in your state.
And I just want to add something very quickly. Seth said earlier that we want kids to get the diploma and go on and get more education, whether it's technical education or whether it's a college education. We don't want them just to be aspiring to a GED, though we think in a lot of cases that's a good start. The other thing I would add is that we want the people who are working in this field to think of these children as they would their own kids. What would they want in terms of education at a juvenile justice facility if their child was at that facility? I remember one parent telling me flat out earlier in my career as an attorney, I don't want my child to have a GED. I want him to walk down the aisle and get a graduation, and I want to be there. And so a lot of parents feel that way. And we have to begin to think about how we're going to provide that kind of opportunity for kids and families so that they can see themselves in the way that they view their being successful.
That's certainly an important perspective to remember as we engage in this work. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you both again for taking the time to speak with us today and to kick off our discussion about what's next for correctional education. We very much appreciate both departments' close involvement with this series. That was Robert Listenby, the Administrator of the U.S. Department of Justice's Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and Seth Galanter, the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. Now that we have some federal perspective on this, let's start to drill down a little deeper.
Many national organizations, like NDTAC, have been focused on improving education and related services for juveniles in secure care leading up to and since the release of the guidance package. Joining us to talk about the current state and future of correctional education and the guidance package are representatives from 3 of those organizations. Kate Burdick is a staff attorney at the Juvenile Law Center, where she is focused on advancing education rights and improving outcomes for youth in the child welfare and juvenile justice systems. Joining her are Jenny Collier, who is a project director for the Robert F. Kennedy Juvenile Justice Collaborative and a public interest attorney and consultant working across a wide range of juvenile and criminal justice issues, and David Domenici, the executive director of the Center for Educational Excellence in Alternative Settings, a nonprofit working with alternative schools across settings to improve the life chances of the students served. Thank you all for taking the time to speak with us today. Jumping right in, we heard from Administrator Listenby and Deputy Assistant Secretary Galanter a bit about the history behind the guidance package. I'm wondering if each of you could tell us a little bit about how your respective organizations have been working in the area of correctional education and how they were involved in the creation of the package. Kate, can we start with you?
Great. So Juvenile Law Center's mission includes improving opportunities for court-involved youth, and obviously access to quality education is a key part of that goal, and it's something that we've been working on for years. And within that, we tend to focus on the latter part of the school-to-prison pipeline, that is, making sure that the education rights of young people are protected while they're in and exiting juvenile correctional facilities. So we were very excited when the Department of Education held its first summit on correctional education back in 2012. But there was a consensus within advocates and the department, I think, too, following that summit that there needed to be greater focus on specifically on the rights of young people, that they have distinct needs and rights, and to pull out juveniles from the adult population. So following the 2012 summit, we worked with Jenny at RFK, as well as Chris Scott at the Open Society Policy Center, Candace Putter at PACT, and the Racial Justice Initiative, Cynthia Robbins. We convened 8 regional listening sessions with over 100 leaders around the country who had been working on juvenile justice and education issues. And together we developed 20 comprehensive policy recommendations that we presented at a second summit hosted by the Department of Ed, along with the Ford Foundation in April 2013. And I'm sure Jenny can speak more about this, but we were thrilled that the guidance package reflected most of the concerns and suggestions that were raised by the field during those sessions, as memorialized in the recommendations.
And Jenny, I think that's a great segue to you.
Great, thanks. Yes, as Kate mentioned, Robert F. Kennedy Juvenile Justice Collaborative definitely worked closely with Juvenile Law Center, the others Kate mentioned, and folks in the field to really try to bring the voice of people on the ground doing this work to the federal policy discussion that was taking place in Washington around these issues at the department. And we started this work a few years earlier, partnering with Juvenile Law Center and others in trying to bring the voice of people on the front lines to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act consideration that was going on at that time. And Robert F. Kennedy Juvenile Justice Collaborative focuses on youth reentry specifically. And so we had been working on that issue for a while and realized what a critical component education really is to young people successfully returning to their communities from the juvenile justice system. And so it seemed very natural for us to expand our work in this education piece of reentry to partner even more closely with the Juvenile Law Center and others to do the listening sessions nationwide and to advocate with others, with the Department of Education and Department of Justice, to really make sure that the guidance could reflect as much of the community sentiment and requests for policy change as possible. And, that it was really thrilling to see that in a relatively short period of time, over the course of 18 to 24 months, the, input from the ground really did get translated into the guidance package, which reflected a lot of the recommendations. And, it's our hope as we continue to work with Juvenile Law Center and others to make sure that as many of those recommendations can get implemented as possible.
David, anything to add in terms of your organization's participation?
Well, we're a fairly small nonprofit that sort of got started right about the time that things were starting to move in this space, as Kate and Jenny talked about. So I think we were lucky. We do a lot of work inside of facilities, so felt like we were able to offer insights to what we really see day to day working and getting inside of facilities. And while doing that, unless you really are sort of wear blindfolds, you, in addition to noticing the day to day practice challenges, you come across just a huge number of sort of larger policy related matters that you want to start see addressed as well. So again, I think our involvement was we were able to sort of bring forth what we're seeing inside of facilities, try to stir the pot a little bit on some policy issues, and then on some specific pieces like the Pell Grants, which we may or may not talk about later. I think this field is also just rife with just sort of misinformation, and that was just a long-standing issue that was sort of poorly understood. That thankfully, as people raised it, it made its way up to the policy level.
So reflecting on the work you all have done in the time since its release, what do you think has been the guidance package's initial impact? What have your organizations been doing since its release? David, since you and your organization have maybe spent the most time on the ground with a lot of different justice systems and schools and secure care settings, let's start with you.
In general, I think that you can, although the guidance package had a number of components, I think it can be sort of roughly divided, again, especially if you separated the Pell Grants into two pieces. One is sort of the big piece about what does quality education look like and what should happen in order to deliver quality education. There's the separate two pieces, which really are about kids with special needs and kids with disabilities and complying with civil rights laws. Both, I think, have had a significant impact in the field. I think, sort of unfortunately, the pieces that are focused on compliance are easier for us to help people to see and get their arms around because of fear of litigation than the sort of practice day-to-day, how do you improve the quality of education in your facilities work. So again, I think on the good news is I think that the guidance package, recent court settlements and statements by the departments about just the clarity that juvenile justice agencies and their education partners must comply with IDEA and ADA, I think is having a major impact and will continue to have a really positive, significant impact, particularly related to the use of isolation and segregation and ensuring that all kids get their needs, special education or needs met while confined. Again, I think it's much harder and a slower slog to address the large package and the series of guidance that relates to quality instruction, increased relevance, improved use of technology, data, et cetera, because those are sort of long-standing system challenges that require really, really significant work on the part of juvenile justice agencies, state offices of education, school districts, principals, teachers, all the way down the line. The same struggles that we have in the school reform effort more generally.
And I'll just add from my perspective, I think one of the major, the biggest impact that the guidance package has had is really just by raising the profile of this issue and starting the conversation, both on the ground and for advocates like myself to use it to talk with legislators and others about the importance of this issue. And I'll give an example. My colleague was able to organize a training on the guidance for providers from Pennsylvania on implementing it. And, this was a pretty rare opportunity to get providers from across the state in one room talking about correctional education for the first time. And I don't know that that's ever happened before in our state where everyone's been all together talking about this particular issue. And it would have been hard to, see the timeliness and have a reason to all come together like that were it not for the guidance coming down from both Departments of Ed and Departments of Justice to catalyze that. And it's been a great tool also in our state and local and national legislative reform, as well as we educate lawmakers about the need for education protections for juvenile justice involved youth in ESEA reauthorization and other potential laws.
You've started to discuss some of this already, but where do you think juvenile justice systems and facilities and programs need the most support in meeting the provisions of the guidance package? What are some of the biggest challenges they face? Kate, can you lead things off?
I do think work still needs to be done to even spread the word about the guidance package. I know the departments have been working really hard on this, so just getting the word out, I think, is a crucial first step. And again, echoing what Jenny said about resources, it isn't an automatic thing that places are going to have everything already set to carry out all of the goals, even if they recognize, that the guiding principles are spot on. And so I think both more resources or some kind of technical assistance and models of how to implement these provisions using the same budget would be very helpful and within facilities.
This is Jenny. I also think that having, experts such as David, available to people and support for his work and others in that position to be able to guide local jurisdictions is really critical, because that's something that people really identified in our survey as being necessary in some cases. I think in particular because you're trying to often bridge two very siloed systems in lots of jurisdictions, a justice system or juvenile justice system and an education system. And what Robert F. Kennedy Juvenile Justice Collaborative has found from its Elementary and Secondary Education Act work is that those systems continue to be highly siloed in most places, and that doing this work well, it requires some engagement between the two. And as Kate said, getting those tables of people together in a way that's positive requires, I think, special knowledge and resources and expertise. Again, people like David have to help guide those local folks through a maybe potentially complicated process of doing the reform that's needed to make sure that quality education is available again inside and upon return. So resources are really important, but also making sure that expertise is available. Again, it's hard work, but it's work that absolutely needs to be done.
David, anything you want to add to that?
One thing we need to increase the awareness, which both Kate and Jenny have talked about, and then we need to find ways to hold the adults accountable at the system and individual level. And that is maybe less about financial resources, and again, more to do with real clear expectations from state offices of education, from advocacy community, from the federal government about these things simply cannot happen. We have facilities all around the country where high school students, for a range of not good reasons, only get to go to school for 2 or 3 hours at a time, which would never be permitted in a community school. And again, why does that happen? It happens because there is no accountability that says it shouldn't, and then it is coupled with a philosophical belief that these are kids who are locked up, and it's okay if they just go to school for a couple hours. And we don't have we need to address both the policy issue and then this sort of philosophical piece.
Well, again, I think that's a perfect segue to the final area we want to cover. For each of you and the organizations you represent, what do you think is next for correctional education? Where should the field be focused, and how will your organizations continue to push this issue forward? Jenny, would you like to start?
Robert F. Kennedy Juvenile Justice Collaborative, while it remains committed to ESCA reauthorization and the guidance package implementation work, also has been looking more recently at higher education issues. David raised the Pell Grant issue earlier. That, along with other Higher Education Act issues that Congress may take up, or at least begin to more seriously consider Higher Education Act reauthorization. And what are the barriers, both actual and law barriers, as well as policy or other types of social or practice barriers that exist in both local and state areas, schools, universities and colleges, as well as, again, legal barriers that really prevent young people involved in the juvenile justice system or the justice system from accessing both inside and upon return higher education or other related career and technical preparation. That is really, again, appropriate for us to expect these young people to need, want, and require as they, emerge into adulthood and need to support themselves and be, hopefully, active participants in the, modern economy. Higher education is really something that is becoming essential, and we should be preparing young people involved in the justice system for that eventuality, whether it be career preparation or post-secondary education and higher education. And so for us, focusing on post-secondary education is becoming a more pressing issue. But again, I think, we're trying to balance that with making sure that the work on the guidance and ESCA reauthorization still, get to some place of hopeful completion or a place where we've done everything we can do.
David, why don't we continue with you?
I think we're really on a precipice, and particularly at the juvenile level, we're going to see some really transformative change taking place. In spite of the challenges of getting the guidance package sort of out there and acted upon, but again, I totally agree. The field is changing. There's a much more focus and understanding that we have kids who are locked up, that thousands of kids come and go through these systems a year, and that we need to and can do a better job. There's been so much work done on this front end of the juvenile justice side and on terms of confinement, thank goodness, for so many years by so many advocates. To some degree, the field is now more ready to say, oh, well, what's going on between 8 and 3? Is it high quality? Is it not high quality? Because some of the other really horrific things going on in juvenile justice facilities from the past are at least not as egregious or as widespread. So we can now start to focus on correctional education. And again, I think the train is moving, and very quickly we're going to see that there is some terrific work being done in a handful of state juvenile justice systems around the country. And these systems talk to each other. They acknowledge each other. There's strong networks for people to support each other. It's going to become impossible for juvenile justice agencies to take kids and to put them in isolation for multiple days at a time very soon, thankfully. And very quickly, agencies that are doing that will be real outliers, and there will be litigation, and it will come to a screeching halt, I believe. There are state juvenile justice agencies right now where young people have access to the internet. They can take online courses. They can communicate with online tutors. They have access to post-secondary options. They have really, really engaging teachers in their classroom with them doing project-based learning. And I think this is really going to move, and we're, again, going to very quickly start to see young people in many, many places go to school with a Chromebook, leave school with a Chromebook, if they choose to do homework, to do online courses in the evenings in their dorms. And we're going to see kids enrolling in college classes and doing a whole bunch of really interesting creative things. And what we're going to be left with is some of these sort of hard policy practices that take place that we'll need to really address around teacher quality, teacher accountability, instructional quality, but we'll get there.
And Kate?
Well, I hesitate somewhat to talk about what's next because I don't want to underestimate the work that still needs to be done in publicizing and implementing and enforcing all of the principles that are espoused in the guidance package. But I agree with David and Jenny that it's an exciting time and that, there's a future here for building on all of this in terms of what's next for correctional education. I personally would love to see, to the extent that the principles in the guidance package are aspirational and that they're not necessarily enforceable in the same way that some of the IDEA and ADA and other civil rights portions of the guidance are, to see in legislation at either the state level or the federal level some of those provisions. Some things we'd like to see, for example, are stronger provisions about making sure credits can transfer that are earned in juvenile justice facilities, making sure that school districts aren't able to automatically exclude kids returning from juvenile justice placements by putting them into inferior alternative education schools or keeping them out altogether, better data collection across systems. And I think that there is still room for some more guidance from the federal level on some of those issues, especially around reentry and higher ed. But finally, I just wanted to say, in the same way that there has been momentum building around correctional education, and it's really exciting, I also think that there's a movement brewing to make sure that who we call disconnected youth, that they're getting employability skills and they're put on track to family-sustaining careers. And our juvenile justice-involved young people are a huge portion of those disconnected youth. And so making sure that they get the career and technical education when they're in facilities and when they're returning from facilities, I think is a critical priority and something that Juvenile Law Center is going to be working on well, we've already started, but we're going to be continuing to work on with our partners.
I think that sums things up nicely. We're certainly at a pivotal moment in progressing high-quality correctional education, and while there's still a lot of important work to be done, the future is very promising. Well, Kate, Jenny, and David, I want to thank you all for sharing your work and thoughts with us today, and we look forward to continuing our work together in the future. That was Kate Burdick, staff attorney with the Juvenile Law Center, Jenny Collier, the project director of the Robert F. Kennedy Juvenile Justice Collaborative, and David Domenici, executive director of the Center for Education Excellence in Alternative Settings.
Thank you, Alexandra. When Secretary of Education Arne Duncan and then Attorney General Eric Holder unveiled the Correctional Education Guidance Package, they did so at the Northern Virginia Juvenile Detention Center School, in large part because of the school's exemplary efforts to provide high-quality education-related services to its students. Joining us today to talk about the education program at the NVJDC school, as well as to share her thoughts on the guidance package and what's next for correctional education, is Principal Jeanette Allen. Jeanette, welcome to the program. So now we've heard about the guidance package and correctional education generally from both the federal perspective and from several national organizations focused on this issue. But we know it's those administrators, teachers, and support staff on the ground that are implementing these programs. So from your perspective as a principal of a school at a juvenile secure care facility, what is the importance of federal guidance like the correctional education package?
Well, for us specifically, I think it was very reaffirming, not only for our detention center, but for all of the state programs operated in Virginia, because this was just evidence that we were on the right track to begin with. Our fundamentals were aligned with what is best practice and what's expected of education in correctional facilities. So it was great confirmation for us to say that we're doing the work that needs to be done, but also it was, okay, so great, we got that reassurance. Now, how do we go beyond that? And then it was also a tool to help bridge the communication between our educational program and the facility to say, you know, these are why we're required or demanding to do offer certain educational programs or activities for our students, because, you know, we have to and we should be. And so it was a very good conversation starter with the facility.
Well, you've already started to talk about this, but can you tell us a bit more about how, in many ways, your school's programming was already meeting the provisions of the guidance package and even surpassing them?
Well, in terms of the guiding principles, the detention center and the education program has worked really hard to ensure that we have a safe and secure school, but at the same time that we don't let safety and security trump the education process, because if we shut down school every time there was a security issue, that would be a problem. So we've worked together. We have a very good practice where we have detention specialists in the classrooms. We have low teacher-to-student ratios, and that's because of the way we're staffed. So that has been very helpful in making sure that we prioritize education, and that education, I think everyone in the detention center, including the teachers and the detention center staff, say school is the most important thing and it must go on. So since all of us are on that same page, it just facilitates the education program. And we also have, in terms of support and funding, we are funded well, and I haven't been in a school where I felt that all of the needs were met, like that there wasn't something lacking or something's missing. And the educational program here is very well staffed. And so there's, I think that's, you know, we have two special education teachers, we have a literacy coach, and we have an ELL teacher. Those are just the supportive teachers in addition to our content and elective teachers. And all of our teachers they're hired through our LEA, which is Alexandria City Public Schools, and they all meet the requirements for a Virginia State license in whatever area that they're teaching. So that's very important, and I think that was something that took some years to get, but we are there. 100% of our staff is certified in the area, in the curricular area in which they're teaching. And also our curriculum is aligned with our local LEA, and we participate in professional development, not only with the state operated programs, but also with Alexandria City, to make sure that we are relevant and up to date with best practice, as well as we get textbooks when there's textbooks adoptions and things of that nature.
Given those really high quality practices already in place at the NVJDC school, was there anything in the guidance package that pointed you and your team and the facility administrators toward any improvements you could make, or focus you on anything that you could be doing even better, if that's a fair question?
Yeah, no, it certainly was helpful. I mean, once you feel like you're doing what's expected of you and even exceeding what's expected of you, it does give you room to think about, okay, what more can we do? How could we further improve our instructional program and the services that we provide here? So one of the things that prior to the guidance, but especially when the guidance package came out, was thinking about how are we getting our kids college and career ready? How is that transition process? And looking at one thing we do not offer is we do not have a school counselor here. So that I think that need is to have maybe someone who is specialized in preparing kids to make that transition from 13 to 16, those post-secondary education years. And so that I see as an area, because part of the guidance was also about the Pell Grant, and the kids had a lot of questions about that, and then that triggered questions about, what is financial aid? What is that? And I think that they don't necessarily ask those questions at their home schools, if they're attending a homeschool. And if once we have them here, I mean, this is the best opportunity to be able to educate them, not only in the content that they need for graduation, but in the skills and the information they need post-secondary. And I think also there's that social emotional piece. We have a strong character ed program with the Virginia State operated programs. However, I think what would help enhance that is also having a counselor to hold those groups, to someone who has that background in that curriculum, to be able to reinforce, introduce, and help them apply that.
So what do you see as some of the challenges that still exist for your school or for the facility more generally when it comes to truly meeting those more aspirational aspects, as we've heard them refer to today, of the guidance package? And do you think those reflect the challenges of the field in general?
I think taking a look at how, and I don't know how this is across the country, but having detention centers be able to issue credits. I think we're dealing mostly with at-risk youth who this might be their first educational experience, a positive educational experience. They may spend up to an entire school year with us. However, if they don't transfer into another school, a base school that can issue credits, they lose those credits. So it's a mixed message that we're sending. Like, you performed great, you did well, you had a great success. However, it may not count if you don't decide to enroll in another school. And I've noticed just in my 1 year here, I took for granted prior to coming here that everyone was in school. I'm familiar with dropouts and things of that nature, but I hadn't seen kids who had been out of school since 8th grade and were now 17 years old. I mean, that was scary. And for them to have completed such great work here and had, for the first time, had such a positive experience, and were not able to earn credits, it's something that it should be looked at and something that we could work on improving for them, making their time here not only count as a success for them, but also count academically for them. But I would say another challenge would be dealing with the room restriction or the security piece, the behavior outside of school that sometimes gets the kids in trouble and takes them from class. And some of those things, I'm a big believer, it's like when they're at the detention center outside of school, it's like they're at home. And behaviors at home, when parents, give consequences to children about poor behaviors at home, they don't tell them that you can't go to school. That's not a consequence, and it should never be a consequence. So working with the detention center to say, okay, I understand that you have consequences and rules to enforce and security rules to enforce. However, taking school away should not be one of those consequences. It should be at the most severe level, not at the, not for not complying at dinner. That should mean that they should be out of school for a day. I don't see the logic in that. And I think the administration here is more willing to talk about it. We haven't come up with a solution to it yet, but I think all the systems are in place for us to have a successful conversation about it and hopefully a successful outcome, but that hasn't happened yet.
Well, wrapping up for this conversation, I do want to know your thoughts on what's next for correctional education. We've heard a little about what your school and facility will be working on, but where do you think the field should be focused, and how can local schools and facilities really play a part in the larger effort to keep high-quality correctional education a national priority?
Well, for ourselves, we're looking, I think our reflection last year was that perhaps that we could challenge ourselves to stretch our kids more. We had a lot of gifted students come through our facility last year, and I think all of the teachers reflected that they could do more to differentiate for those learners who need more challenging material. So how to stretch the content to also challenge those learners who can accommodate larger tasks, bigger concepts. So I think that's one thing that we're going to be working on this year is stretching the curriculum to stretch all learners, not just those who are able to, but also those who need help, but still not give them something that's easy for them, but something that stretches them a little. I mean, all in good form, but not without support. Also, we're going to be looking at our grading practices, how our grades are representative of the work that they're doing here, and then also in terms of what role do I think local agencies and facilities can play in keeping correctional education on the national forefront. I think, highlighting the stories of graduate success stories, also visiting, upper level officials visiting detention centers, keeping that on the forefront. I would say, the package, the guidance package, revisiting 1 year later, where are we? What are we doing? How is this working? How has this benefited the kids? Like keeping it still in the spotlight. I think also making sure that the educational programs are linked with local district public schools, so as to keep up with professional development, making sure that they're meeting the requirements, and also having them be part of a larger system, because sometimes correctional education can be quite isolating. So being in contact with the local school district and being part of that staff and participating in all those activities that the staff has, that the district has, would also help keep it. I would say that I think it's also part of the responsibility of the leader or the teachers in the correctional facility to make time to participate in outside activities that would bring more attention to correctional education and to be seen as professionals. Like, for example, I'm serving on a city-wide task force. That's something, above and beyond what my responsibilities are. However, I feel that being part of that task force not only will, help give a positive view of correctional education, but at the same time, I'm doing something that's relevant and that impacts our population. So taking those opportunities outside of your LEA, outside of your school district, but also in your greater community to impact corrections in any form is also helpful.
I think that's a great reminder about the importance of really being mindful that youth in secure care are students just the same as any other, and that really goes for the teachers, principals, and other staff. It's really all one big education system that should be supported as such. Well, Jeanette, I want to thank you again for taking the time to be with us today and sharing your unique perspective on the guidance package in correctional education. Jeanette Allen is the principal of the school on the grounds of the Northern Virginia Juvenile Detention Center. Finally today, we wanted to end the program hearing from those who know correctional education best, young people who have experienced education in secure care settings firsthand. Our partners at the Juvenile Law Center have established Juveniles for Justice, a youth engagement program that includes young people who have been involved in the juvenile justice system and that offers them an opportunity to assess the system's strengths and weaknesses and then develop and implement advocacy projects to improve the system. The Juvenile Law Center's Associate for Youth Engagement, Kathy Maffa, sat down with several of Juvenile for Justice's youth advocates to talk about their educational experiences. We hear now directly from Jeremy Hudson, Shira Hill, and Bruce Morgan.
I'm Jeremy Hudson, 22 years old. I'm a youth partner with the county leadership team here in Philadelphia, and I'm also a staff at the Juvenile Detention Center. I entered the juvenile justice system at the age of 14 years old until about 2021.
What was your experience like with school before you spent time in residential placement?
Before I entered residential placement, I spent a lot of time in charter schools and was doing very well until I got bored of the same repetitiveness. I ended up getting kicked out and then sent to public school. My school experience from there was, for lack of better words, crappy. I was attending West Philadelphia High School. Grades there was based on your attendance. It was one of them schools where it wasn't something that I was excited about going to. There was no structure. Half the time the teacher was focused on getting the class to settle down more than teach, so I wasn't learning too much.
And so what was your experience with education like in the facility? How was it different?
It was kind of, to an extent, like the same charter school experience, but just more, I don't know, I don't want to say forceful, but it was a part of your treatment, so you didn't really want to mess it up too much. It wasn't like, I don't think your focus was more on grades. It was more on hoping that you do everything you got to do so you can go home.
Okay, so what were the classes like?
The classes, it was one size fits all. Everybody had the same type of work. It wasn't based on grades. It was just, if I'm getting 9th grade math, the kid next to me is getting the same type of math. It was one size fits all.
Okay. What did the facility do to help you be successful with your education while in placement? And what should the facility have done differently to make that process more successful for the students?
I wouldn't say the facility helped me as much because I was the one often helping others, but I can say it had the type of atmosphere that would encourage learning and help make learning and staying focused possible. I think they could have done things a slight bit different opposed to making the classes universal, by instead of making everything one size fits all. So,
do you feel as though you received a good education while in placement?
I personally don't think I received a good or bad education. There's always room for improvement, but overall, I can't say it was bad. If it was more grade-based, that would have helped better prepare me when I went back to regular school. The stuff I was learning in placement wasn't as much aimed towards potential grade level. It was as if when I started school there, I was in the lower level, no ifs, ands, or buts. I think the facility could have reached out to my home school and got my records so that way they could, to some extent, gear me towards my returning grade level upon discharge.
My name is Shira Hill. I'm 21 years old. I entered the juvenile justice system at the age of 16 and I exited at the age of 18. And right now I'm going to be a student at Community College of Philadelphia, majoring in criminal justice in September.
What was your experience like with school before you spent time in residential placement?
My experience with school before I went to the residential placement was basically I was an extinguished honor roll student, which means you always have A's, and I was playing sports and I was in different types of clubs.
And what was your experience with education how was your experience with education in the facility different?
In the facility, I was given work that was like multiplication, division, subtraction, addition, like split circles in half and stuff like that, when in school I was doing algebra.
What did the facility do to help you be successful with your education while in placement?
Before I went to the residential placement, I went to a detention center, and in that detention center, they gave everyone books and asked you what kind of math you did, and they'll let you go back into the book and figure out where you left off when you was in regular school, and they will help you from where you left off. If you need help, then you can do it by yourself. If not, then they will help you themselves.
And so that was in the detention placement, not the residential placement. So what should the facility, the residential placement, have done differently to make the education process more successful?
The residential placement should have did something similar like the detention center did, like make sure that each child was doing the appropriate work for their ages, and if they needed help, then they should have been helping them instead of giving everyone the same material.
Do you feel as though you received a good education while in placement?
I do not believe that I received an appropriate education while in placement. Being as though I was given remedial work prior to exiting the system, I was not prepared to transition back into my community school, which of course I would be expected to comprehend grade level assignments. And I was also placed in a school for students with behavioral needs for 2 years because the school district refused to allow students from placements into their schools. So basically, failure to have a transition plan in place, it caused a lot of hardships, and it also resulted in me receiving my GED recently at the age of 21.
My name is Bruce Morgan. I'm 23 years old. I'm a current medical assistant graduate, and I just got accepted into Power Courts PHL here in Philadelphia. And I entered the juvenile justice system at age 15.
What was your experience like with school before you spent time in residential placement?
Well, in school, it was just like a lot of work. I had to go from class to class each period, collecting different amounts of information and, doing different work and having homework in each class. And it was just like, a lot for me to juggle. And, the more I had to do, the more I kept my mind on how hard I had to work.
So how did you do in school usually?
Well, I actually did pretty good in school if I wasn't, joking around.
What about sports? Did you do sports in school?
Oh, yeah. I played basketball my senior year, and I played football 9th, 10th grade year. And I played my junior year in placement.
Okay. And how was your experience with education while you were in the facility?
Well, in the facility, it was just like, I get my work and I would just, breeze through it because it wasn't anything that, I had to really raise my hand and ask questions for. It was just like, basic work, maybe some multiplication questions, some division questions, like if I was in a math class, or, basic reading things, reading and comprehension, where we just would read through something to answer the questions. It wasn't like, actual textbooks work or, real literature. So it's like it was pretty basic, and it wasn't anything that would have me, thinking.
What did the facility do to help you be successful with your education while in placement?
It was just basically us getting work. Like, for me to be successful, they made us go to school. Like, we had to go to school. That was one thing. In placement, you have to go to school, so it's no hooking, no skipping school. So, I mean, maybe to answer your question, maybe that's like a good answer for it.
Okay, and what should the facility have done differently to make the education process more successful?
I feel like in placement, rather than them always, disciplining us on doing bad things and, acting out behavioral-wise and sending us to the sanction unit, I think, if we did, if our grades weren't right, or if we were slacking a little bit in the classroom, then we should have been held accountable in that aspect of our stay in placement.
Do you feel as though you received a good education while in placement, and how was your success helped prepare you for what's next in your life?
As far as education, I don't feel like, it was a great enough education for me to, excel and to be prepared for, what I had next up in life. And as far as, being successful in there helped me, prepare, I felt like the sports aspect of the placements, pushed me to do better. my coaches had, they always told me, you have, show what you can do, stop playing around all the time, and, you can do this and you can do that. And they pushed me to the next level. So after leaving placement, I always wanted to, do sports and play.
Well, those stories certainly drive home the importance of providing young people in juvenile secure care settings with the high-quality education they deserve, and that will best prepare them for success long after they've left placement. And that concludes this portion of the program today. We hope you have enjoyed hearing about the Correctional Education Guidance Package and its initial impact, and about what might be next for correctional education generally from the many different perspectives presented today. We hope this program serves as a catalyst to continue the great work that's being done in correctional education, and NDTAC looks forward to working with our partners across the country in support of those efforts. Our thanks again to all of our guests for joining us today. As a reminder, this program will be archived on our website, www.neglected-delinquent.org. On the archive, you'll find not only this recording, but links to additional resources on this topic, as well as more information about our guests. We hope you'll take the time to visit the archive and pass it on to your colleagues. But before we wrap up today, we want to turn now to you for your questions and comments about today's program.